In On Christian Teaching, St. Augustine writes that in this mortal life, we're like travelers away from our Lord. If we wish to return to the homeland where we can be happy, we must use this world, not enjoy it, in order to discern the invisible attributes of God, which are understood through what has been made. And what Augustine means there by not enjoy it is he means not be tied down by things in the world because we're fixated on things in this world for their own sake, right? And that's not a good idea, Augustine suggests, because everything in this world is changeable. Everything in this world is passing away. And so it's really in our interest to attach ourselves to what's unchangeable and to connect ourselves, our minds, our actions, to what's eternal, right? And we've discussed this in a different discussion. You know, reflecting on the quote we have here from St. Paul, where St. Paul writes in Romans chapter 1, referring to the invisible attributes of God which are understood through what has been made. And what Paul is getting at, the context of this quote, is that Paul is arguing that human beings everywhere have a capacity to understand certain moral laws, because there is a moral law at work in the universe. And every human being has the capacity to tap into that moral law. There are certain moral laws for which people have no excuse if they breach those moral laws, because these moral laws are built into the universe, right? This is what Paul is saying. And we've noted in different discussions that this seems similar to concepts that we see in very different cultures. The Tao among the Chinese, Ma'at among the ancient Egyptians, the Logos in the minds, for example, of Stoic philosophers. But what we want to do is not get tied down in this world, not be fixated on this world for its own sake. This is what Augustine means by not enjoying it, but using it. We want to study and learn about things in this world with the primary purpose of being reminded of the eternal, being reminded of what's unchangeable. And so one of the topics then that Augustine raises is what he calls signs. And he says that a sign is a thing which of itself makes some other thing come to mind, right? Besides the impression that it presents to the senses. So we see the sign, right? But that sign reminds us of something else, right? So we see something and there is that thing itself, but then it reminds us of something else. And the discipline of semiotics, sees this text from Augustine as sort of a foundational text, right? So you can study semiotics, that is the study of signs, symbols, and their meanings, right? And for people who study semiotics, Augustine's On Christian Teaching is actually a foundational text. So here's a sign. Everyone recognizes this sign. Well, what is it? It's a yellow M-shaped thing, okay? Okay, well, we recognize the sign, but of course it immediately takes our mind to something we don't see. We see the sign, but our mind immediately goes to something else, and that is, obviously, the restaurant McDonald's. And then from there, the sign may remind us of the human capacity for, or the human tendency to do things that aren't good for us, right? Even the McDonald's Corporation itself is not going to argue, because it's not possible to argue, that it's a good idea to eat McDonald's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? Everyone knows that this is not a good idea. And there is something in human beings, and we don't want to get too heavy here, but there is something in human beings that is self-destructive, right? I'm not saying that having an occasional Egg McMuffin, that having an occasional Big Mac is self-destructive, right? But I think most people would agree that eating every day at McDonald's for 6 months straight, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I think everyone would agree that that probably is destructive, right? That's probably not a good idea, okay? I understand there are salads now and things like that, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, this is a sign, and it immediately takes our mind to some other thing. And so this is what Augustine refers to by signs. We see the thing itself, but then it brings our mind to something else. It could bring our mind to, just the restaurant. I think, this symbol here probably competes with the American flag as a symbol for the United States, right? I think most Americans would admit that when they go to foreign countries and see that sign, in one way or another, it reminds them of home, right? This is kind of our national restaurant here in the United States, whether we go to it or not. Anyway, also, I guess another thing this symbol can point us to is the human desire for convenience. I mean, one of the nice things about McDonald's, even if you go there and you say, well, the Big Mac I'm about to eat is not the healthiest thing in the world, but it is yummy, and I am gonna, it's only gonna take me 3 minutes before I have it, So there's this human desire for convenience, and of course that's what leads to the development of this business in the first place, the human desire for convenience. Well, let's stick with this for a minute. A person is at his best when in his whole life he strives toward the unchangeable. Okay, so we've done something a little difficult here, I think. We have a symbol for McDonald's, and now we're saying, so now let's try to apply this to something unchangeable, right? Is there anything eternal about McDonald's? And I think the answer to that question is no. Like everything in the world, McDonald's will go away. That makes some people happy, that makes some people sad. But anyway, it's just a fact. Eventually, at some point in the future, McDonald's, like the rest of planet Earth, will no longer exist, right? So we can look at that sign and say, well, there's a positive and there's a negative. Let's start with the negative. There's a negative, and that is that human beings do have a propensity to do things that's not good for them, right? And again, I'm not putting down McDonald's, okay, but we all understand, okay? That's the McDonald's Corporation itself is not going to say, please come here for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? And that's the path to health. Everyone knows that that's not the case. And so there is something about human beings that we're attracted often to things that aren't good for us, right? Well, how could we relate that to something unchangeable? And that is that, human beings, have this capacity for self-destruction. They have the propensity to do things that isn't good for them. But usually they wish that the world weren't like this, right? Usually they wish that the world weren't like this. Usually they wish for a world without destruction. They wish for a world where these self-destructive forces aren't at work. So we could be reminded perhaps that there's an unchangeable realm, to use Augustine's phrase, the realm of God, where these self-destructive impulses are not at work, right? Now, there's the other side. Because even though, pretty much everybody knows that McDonald's food is not healthy food, right? We're putting aside the salad for now, and everyone knows McDonald's food isn't healthy, and yet it's a fantastically successful business. And why is that? Well, because there is this one side that we talked about, but there's something else, and that is that a lot of people think the food tastes really great, and a lot of people really like the convenience. It's quick, and it's tasty, and it's familiar, right? Well, how could we relate that to something that's unchangeable? Think of the idea of convenience. Convenience means ease. Convenience means a lack of striving. Convenience means a lack of effort. Just, think about those times, where you've been in a fast food restaurant and it's not fast, right? Where the lines are long, or the service seems slow. Now, of course, service in a sit-down restaurant, that takes you maybe 15 minutes to get your food, right? and that's normal. In McDonald's will drive some of us into a state of rage, right? But I thought this was fast food. And so we go there for convenience. And there is this human desire for ease. There is this human desire for comfort. And in this world, that can get us into trouble, right? Because that can cause us not to work hard, that can cause us to be lazy, that can cause us to be lethargic, that can cause us to eat at McDonald's too much, But how can we take Augustine's idea and attach that to something that's eternal? Well, there is something in us that longs for a reality that is restful and always restful. There is something within us that longs for a reality where there's no need for struggle, where there's no need for striving. And this is the conception of heaven. This is the conception of a blissful afterlife. This is the conception of that thing that's unchangeable. And so I understand that using the McDonald's symbol is a little bit distracting, right? But I think even as we look at this symbol, at this sign, and the kinds of things it can point us to, on the one hand, there's a destructive impulse that most people do want to be liberated from. The sign can also point us to the human desire for convenience, that is, for ease. And human beings do long for that. And in both senses, we can attach those thoughts to something unchangeable, to something eternal. Let's move on to something that maybe is a little less distracting. Augustine notices that in some places, for example, in early Genesis, a serpent is a sign for deception. A serpent is a sign of destruction. And so we look at this thing, this snake, which is a kind of sign. It can become a symbol of something. It can become a symbol for destruction. It can become a symbol for deception. And the serpent is described that way in early Genesis. But then in the Gospels, we see Jesus telling people to be wise as serpents. And this is meant in a positive way. Be wise. And then Jesus uses a metaphor. Be wise as a serpent. Well, to understand exactly what Jesus means there, we'd have to study the serpents that lived in that part of the world, right? The serpents that live in the part of the world Jesus lived in. When he says be wise as serpents, I mean, what did he actually mean by that? I don't know the answer to that question. What did Jesus actually mean by that? Because when I see snakes in the world I live in, wisdom isn't the thing that comes to my mind. So what did Jesus mean by that? What did that phrase mean to people in the first century, right? When Jesus said, be wise as serpents. Here's an example of another theme in Augustine's book. We discussed this in a different place where people say, well, to understand the scriptures, I don't need to study, the teachings of men. I can just, ask for guidance from the Holy Spirit and understand the text. But wait a second, what does that phrase actually mean, be wise as serpents? I mean, to understand that phrase, you've got to study serpents. But to get to the point, to get back to the point that this thing, this image of a snake, right? It's an image of a snake, and it can become a sign. It can become a symbol. A symbol in one case of deception, a symbol in another case of wisdom. And then Augustine says, and then we want to relate those things to what's unchangeable. A longing for a reality in which there is no deception. A longing for a reality in which there is no destruction. A longing for a reality, on the other hand, in which wisdom prevails always and everywhere. You get the idea? So you start with the mundane, something in the world. Oh, there's a snake. I see the thing. The thing is a snake. But then the snake becomes a sign that can lead my mind to other things. A couple different themes, actually very, very different themes. Destruction, wisdom, right? And then I can contemplate those and, okay, well, how can I relate those two thoughts to something that's eternal? This is what Augustine is what he's counseling us to do as we read the scriptures. But this can be applied more broadly as we observe the world. What indications of things eternal do we see all around us? Right? Let's look at another example. In one case, in the New Testament, Satan is described as a ravaging, destructive lion. In another case, Jesus Christ is described as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Right? Same animal, lions, very different metaphors. In one case, destructive and prowling. In another case, sort of this benevolent power. And we long for a reality that's free of prowlers, that's free of destruction. And we long for a reality in which a benevolent power rules. I think this is the kind of thing that Augustine is encouraging us to think about. Here's a thing, it's called a bridge, right? And this thing can symbolize human ingenuity. How do we get over these big rivers? Well, I mean, for the first time in human history, somebody actually built a bridge that stood up when significant weight was put on top of it. So it can symbolize human ingenuity. But in my own case, when I was 19 and I walked across this bridge, I saw something that really took me aback. I saw something I wasn't prepared for psychologically. I wasn't prepared for spiritually. And really, I've never been the same. And what that thing involved, I won't go into details here, but what that thing involved is really the hardship that comes with crushing poverty. The hardship that comes with crushing poverty. And so what does that thing, that bridge, what is it? Well, it's a bridge, but it's also a sign. It's a sign on the one hand of ingenuity, of creativity, of intelligence. In my own mind, it's also a sign of the tremendous hardship that comes with grinding poverty. I attach these things to eternal themes. And the desire to create, which emanates from a creator, the desire to be in the realm of the ultimate creator, the ultimate architect, the ultimate bridge builder, so to speak. Also the desire to be in a realm free of grinding poverty, free of the humiliation that comes with grinding poverty. This is the idea that we're surrounded by things that are things which can become signs, and those signs remind us of certain themes, and we want to relate those themes to what's unchangeable, to what's eternal. So we're talking about not just looking at the world, we're talking about seeing the world. We're talking about interpreting the world. We're talking about walking through the world with our minds on, our souls open, attaching ourselves to what's eternal, attaching ourselves to what is unchangeable. This is the place I met my wife. It's a place where there are concerts, plays, and so it's a symbol, again, of human creativity. It's a symbol of art. In my case, it's a symbol of profound friendship. You know, by far my best friend in the world, who's my wife. It also reminds me, though, that if the world continues, at some point that friendship will end. Like everything in the world, that friendship will end because neither my wife nor I are going to live forever on this planet. Eventually, as time goes on, we won't be here. And so this amazing earthly friendship is not going to be able to last forever. And so as I see this image, I see the place, right? But it's to me a sign. It's a sign of a great gift. That is the wonderful gift of my wife, the wonderful gift of the great friendship that we have. But there's also something sad, the recognition that this gift won't go on forever in this world. because everything in this world changes. Everything in this world is altered. Human beings don't get to live in this world very long. So it's a sign that reminds me of those things, but then I relate those things to what's eternal. The longing for a place where relationships are not broken through death. The longing for a place where companionship is eternal. Jesus says to his disciples, I don't call you disciples anymore, I call you friends. The longing for that. Being in a place where the discipleship ends and the friendship really begins and is eternal. The desire to be in a place where these kinds of friendships are not broken through death, because death doesn't exist. This, to me, is one of the great gifts of Augustine's book. I'm speaking personally now. One of the great insights that he has passed on to me. That is that looking at the world, seeing the things of the world that are signs, thinking about what those signs signify, and then relating those things to eternal themes. We started somewhat ridiculously with the McDonald symbol, although I think even there we see, no, there are eternal themes at work. And we can look at more serious symbols, and maybe that's a little bit easier to make the point. But all around us, everywhere we look, we're seeing things that are signs. And those signs can point us to things that are eternal, to things that are unchangeable. This is how we become not only good readers of the Bible, this is how we become good readers. Not just that, it's how we become thoughtful, engaged human beings in this world.